I'm Robin Vincent. What does it take to start over? For thousands of people leaving Michigan prisons every year, it can come down to one piece of plastic, a photo ID. This month, the Michigan Department of Corrections hit a milestone: 30,000 government-issued IDs distributed to incarcerated people since 2020. That matters because without an ID, you can't get a job, you can't sign a lease, you can't open a bank account, you can't prove you're you. 1 in 5 people who leave Michigan prisons end up going back. The state says that's the lowest it's ever been. But what does a second chance actually look like when you walk out the door with nothing? Rick Speck knows this firsthand. He came home in 2014 after 15 years. No ID. He's now deputy director of Nation Outside, a Michigan re-entry nonprofit run by formerly incarcerated people. Their staff carries more than 500 years of lived experience inside state and federal institutions. Rick, welcome back.
Hey, Robin, glad to be back. Thank you for having me.
So first things first, Rick, why does it matter to give a parolee an ID?
Well, there's so many barriers. I mean, initially this was implemented to reduce what they were calling this first 72-hour barrier, which you mentioned, with housing access, employment, even benefits, enrollment for SNAP and Medicaid. But just think about it. Often you can't enter a shelter without some form of ID. So folks were being released. I didn't have a birth certificate, didn't have a Social Security card. The only thing I was released with was a red card with my picture on it, and it said parolee.
Ouch.
And just even having to show that was kind of dehumanizing when I had to show it at the Social Security office, because I was told it would work, and it didn't work. And the person kind of shrunk back from me when I presented it. And so it really kind of delayed me fully coming home for months, because my mother, who was in a wheelchair at the time, she had to go get my birth certificate. So it creates so many barriers. And oftentimes, what if I didn't have my mom? What would that have looked like then? How long would I have had to wait? What hoops would I have had to jump through just to come home after being a ward of the state for 15 years? And, many folks like me face it. And even though Michigan's doing a better job, we still have gaps. We have gaps with folks that are born out of state, so it may be harder to track down their birth certificate in order to get them the ID.
Rick, we're going to get into some of the complexities here, but I want to go back to your personal experience, if we could, because it sounds like such a contrast. You're getting out of prison, thinking about starting a new life. You're carrying this card with you that says you're a parolee. It sounds like it is a lot of emotions to carry at once. You're feeling hopeful, but then what you described also feels like feeling shame.
Yeah, no, it was a feeling of shame. It was embarrassment. And there's a stigma for us that are coming home. We already, to a certain degree, feel like people already know or can tell that somebody's actually just been released. And even though they can't, that's the way it feels, especially for somebody like me who returned after 15 years. I was a stranger in a strange land.
What do you mean by that?
There was businesses that were no longer there. The home I lived in before my incarceration was gone. I mean, things had changed dramatically just by, location. And people were using debit cards and smartphones to pay for things. And I was just like, how am I going to navigate this? And it's even more complex now with technology. So even then, though, it took me months to really start to get my feet on the ground, to start being able to apply for jobs that ultimately I was denied for because of my record. But I can't imagine what it would have been like to come home with ID, just to be able to start my life again, but then also just to feel like a whole person again, because you're still not really whole, if That makes sense.
It does. It makes a lot of sense. The world has moved forward at a breakneck speed. You're trying to re-enter it with what you feel like is this scarlet letter that you're not sure if people can see or not. They can't, but it feels like they can. And you're trying to reinvent yourself and start anew. And yet it sounds like at every corner, you have barriers to doing that. Very quickly, before we look more at those barriers, the ID itself, we're talking about what, a state-issued ID?
Yeah, state-issued ID, just like you would get at Secretary, same thing you get at Secretary of State. And in some instances for folks that weren't incarcerated that long, not to minimize it, but if folks were gone a year, 2 years, or 3 years and their license hadn't expired, they can actually get, a new license and go home with that. However, for folks like me, where it was a much longer time, that wouldn't have been available.
Okay.
But now it is, right? And, there's still some issues I think we're working out with with who pays for what, but we are doing a much better job. We're not all the way there yet, but we're getting there.
Well, let's talk more about what it would take to get there in your eyes, because as you have noted, there are a lot of barriers for people who are returning home from prison. It's barriers to getting jobs. It's barriers to getting housing. It's barriers to getting social services. Rick, why do you think our society struggles to give second chances to people who are incarcerated?
I think in my experience, folks really believe that these difficulties and things that folks are facing, like, that's a part of the process. Like, that's what you get because you broke the law, you did wrong.
That's your reconciliation, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, I mean, nobody said it would be easy and all these different, cliche sayings. But the reality is we know it's not going to be easy, but I'm still a person, right? And why wouldn't we want folks to come home best equipped to reintegrate, to start working, to be able to become a full member of society? Like, why don't we? And I think sometimes we're comfortable with somebody may have done, and there's crimes that other people are uncomfortable with. And so when those folks have difficulties, it's easy to say, oh, well, look what they did.
Right. That
so
was
the sentence never ends. The time, for me, my sentence has never ended.
Rick, what do you say to a person who says, well, that was someone who killed someone else or raped someone. They can never be trusted again. They don't deserve a second chance. What do you say to that person?
Well, for me, I believe all people have redemptive qualities. I believe all people, are worthy of a second chance. And this is something on a personal level that I struggled with when I was doing work behind abolishing life without the possibility of parole. But based on the folks that I know that have been released, that have taken a life, that were given a second chance, and the work that they're doing, not only just, in the community with their family, but they're actually making the community safer. That's why I turned the corner and said, yes, we don't need folks to do life without parole.
Rick, talk about those, if you would, talk about the struggle that you just mentioned here of doing work. What was it? So
7 years ago, last Thursday, my oldest daughter, Brianna Marie, was unfortunately murdered. And during that time, I was working for the ACLU of Michigan and working on issues like life without the possibility of parole and abolishing that. And as a father who lost their child, of course, my immediate response was, I want that person to do forever. And so while I was doing this work and while I'm going through this personal nightmare, I had to evaluate, my values and my beliefs. And what I realized, with the exception, obviously, of this tragic accident or murder that happened to me and my family, I knew folks deserve another chance. I know that there are checks and balances that they have to see the parole board. They have to have done really amazing things on the inside to be considered after 20 years. And for me, I felt like that system works. And for me, I felt that that system does weed out folks that may not be ready for release at 20 years. And so based on my lived experience and knowing people that had taken a life and were given a second opportunity and the things they did with that opportunity, that helped me to say, okay, I can still get behind this. I still believe in this. This still holds true to my values. And this isn't, in my opinion, this is in no way, diminishing or minimizing what happened to my family and to my daughter.
So you're saying
that was a very real thing, right? Yes.
Yeah. I mean, what I'm hearing from you is that you strongly believe in humanity's capacity to change because of your own experiences, because of the ways you were able to change, to the extent that the man who allegedly committed the crime, who is out on parole right now, and again, I'm so sorry to hear about your daughter who was murdered 7 years ago. You're saying though that you can hold that. You can hold this in your head, in your heart, in your hand, and think about it and think about this person and have some level of forgiveness for them.
Yeah, as somebody that unfortunately was convicted of a violent crime, doesn't mean I was a violent person. I did commit a violent crime. But there were circumstances, and again, not to diminish or minimize anything, I take full responsibility for my actions. But the reality is there were things, traumas that I was encountering, homelessness that I was encountering, decisions I made based on situations that I wish I could take back a million times. But I was not that person, right? And here I am today, 55 years old. I'm certainly not that person at 26. And I've grown and I've matured, and, I'm here trying to give back to my community, keep my community safe, with my family, my grandchildren and siblings. And because I was given a chance and I wasn't thrown away, I'm able to make real change, not just in the community, but in my own family. And there may be people who think I didn't deserve that. And I wake up every day to prove those people wrong.
It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. My guest is Rick Speck. He's the deputy director for Nation Outside. That's a re-entry nonprofit in Michigan, formed and led by formerly incarcerated people. We're discussing the state of Michigan giving parolees IDs to make their re-entry to society from prison easier, and what it would look like if the state cared more about giving people who've been incarcerated second chances at success. I do want to think a little bit more now about this program, if we could, Rick, because now we have some really important context about why you do the work that you do. And so it's one reason why we think your perspective on this program is so important. Do you see us moving in a direction that's more favorable to giving people second chances? I mean, we're talking today because Michigan, again, it's now giving parolees IDs to make their transition home from prison easier. But I think it's important to note the program is voluntary. No law requires it. So whether you get an ID before you walk out depends on where you're locked up and who's working your case. Now, the legislature here in Michigan tried to make it mandatory. The governor vetoed that bill. So whether someone walks out with an ID still depends on which facility they're in and which counselor they get. Is that right? Do I have that right?
I mean, I believe in many instances they are doing a lot better today. But to your point, we still have gaps that exist. There are still people that want to leave with identification that can't because of barriers like being, having an out-of-state birth. And so the problem is oftentimes we don't start to address this ID and this whole situation anywhere from usually like 90 days before they're actually released. But why aren't we securing at least a birth certificate and social security card, which never expire, when they first come in? And that's a part of their file, and that travels with them. And at a minimum, they would have that once they're granted a parole. But even for folks that we know, okay, they're a year from their first out date, maybe it's a good idea to have all this stuff in place for them. Versus, okay, they got the parole, 6 months before your first out date. Typically, you'll see the parole board. You'll get a decision in 30 to 90 days. So if it takes the full 90, now you got 90 days, and guess what? Government doesn't work that efficiently, right?
Yeah, that's right. So
now
Rick,
we have 90 days to try and fast forward this to get this person to be whole again, and they just can't always meet that.
if this program were not just voluntary, do you think that would address that issue?
Yeah, I think if it's mandatory and all of a sudden there's a responsibility for somebody's job to do this, then I think folks will start figuring out how to do it better because it's their job.
Rick, what kinds of things, what else do you think we could be doing? Specific policies supported by the state or cities within Michigan that would signal to you that we believe in second chances. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the major things that folks face is housing insecurity.
Yeah.
Oftentimes you can't really get on with your life until you have a safe place to lay your head at night. And so I really think policy-wise and legislative-wise, and this is something that Nation Outside's been focused on for a number of years, but it is getting housing ordinances and policies and legislation where folks can't discriminate just because somebody has a felony record. How does that diminish them from ever being able to pay bills, take care of a home than anyone else, right? But yet our community is oftentimes just based on a conviction, denied housing. I don't want that person here. Well, who does want them? And when do they have a right to live? And again, just become a whole person again. So housing is something that we really need to focus on, and
that's the biggest barrier. I want to drill down on that for a moment because there was a bill in the legislature last session that died regarding this, banning landlords from discriminating against people who had criminal records. Lawmakers have tried to bring that back. Do you think that bill has a shot?
I do. I do think it has a shot, and I think as we continue to, lift up folks' stories and lived experiences, sometimes people will think, these things are the exception, and they're not. Oftentimes they're the rule. I have a very close friend, been released from prison 18 years. He's been homeless more than he hasn't been based on his conviction, right? He had criminal sexual conduct. So therefore, nobody wants to rent to him. He tried to buy a trailer at one point, had the cash to do it off a small inheritance, didn't want him in there because of his conviction. So he lived in his vehicle more than he's lived in a home.
Rick, I want to spell things out for folks here. What does it mean when you have a criminal record, when you are a formerly incarcerated person, you're trying to integrate into society and you can't find stable housing? What does that mean?
Well, oftentimes, right, and this goes for men and women, sometimes we meet partners and we get into relationships for housing. And that's not a reason to get into a relationship. Again, folks are making decisions based out of desperation, oftentimes because of the same shame associated with folks just are homeless and they're afraid to speak out and share what their situation is because of the shame. And so we just have to do a better job at just recognizing that these are human beings. This is somebody's son and daughter and father and uncle. They're human beings, and why can't we just treat them as such and not wonder what they were convicted of and why they were that? What does that matter? The sentence has been served. They're on parole. Let's help them.
Of course, when we talk about who actually deserves second chances, I'd be remiss not to mention the racial disparity in Americans' prisons. I mean, in Michigan, Black people are 14% of the population, but roughly 46% of the prison population and 64% of those serving life or long sentences. I have to ask you, Rick, how much does society's appetite for second chances have to do with racism?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with it, particularly when you talk about folks of color that are incarcerated and you look at their socioeconomic status versus that of their Caucasian counterparts, and folks are returning home differently, and the opportunities are different, and treatment is different, and folks want to say that that's not true, but it's very true, and we see it all the time. And so it just exacerbates an already extremely difficult situation.
As someone formerly incarcerated, you fought for a second chance, and now it's part of your life's work. Why do you think you got a second chance?
Well, if we're being honest here, I got a third chance. Realistically, I was released previously from prison twice, and so this was my third chance. And so, yes, I love second chances, but I don't want to just, limit it to second chances, because there were folks like me, guess what? They needed a third chance. Some folks needed a fourth chance. I just don't think that if we are willing to give resources to people that have shown they're ready to come home, that have been seen by experts on the parole board, why wouldn't we remove all the barriers, get them home with ID, get them on track for a trade school, college, whatever the case may be? Why does it have to be that we feel that they should still be punished? That's the part I think society struggles with. The sentence is over. When can they just be normal people again? When does the punishment end?
Rick Speck is the Deputy Director for Nation Outside. That's a re-entry nonprofit in Michigan. Rick, thank you so much for joining me on the Metro.
Thank you, Robin.
It's the Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. Coming up next, how do we keep more teachers in the classroom so that more kids can thrive? We'll look at some solutions next. That's coming up on the Metro. Stay with us.